You've got everything ready to roll there? Oh, thank you for attending, and thank you to Monica for getting me on the agenda here today. It's always a pleasure to do research, and even more of a pleasure to have someone to whom it can be presented and who will appreciate it. Actually, I'm speaking on goaltenders today because I had planned on doing the research on defensemen, but when I took a course in how to write history at UPI this fall, the professor said, too big a topic, cut it down, and since there's fewer goaltenders than there are defensemen, we're now doing goaltenders.
Yeah, you should be able to switch from slide to slide.
Not bad. Left or right?
Okay, sorry, the cursor has to be on the picture.
Okay.
Try to clean this up instead. Just don't want it to move. Just like if it doesn't work, just make sure that the cursor is somewhere.
Okay. For someone technologically inept, this is good to have a hand doing this. So I'll be giving a brief history here and background and explanation of the procedure and a summary of the results. Although a goaltender is only one of 6 players on the ice for a team, he is often revered above the others, as his performance is often more critical than those of his other teammates. Memories of goaltenders are embedded in their fans, so much so that Newfoundland troubadour Ron Hines penned a tribute song to Terry Sawchuk in 2010, 40 years after his death. Many changes have affected goaltenders since 1904. With today's medical support, Georges Vezina would probably have had his tuberculosis diagnosed long before he played his last seasons. Certainly players' equipment is one of the important things that we've seen as a dominant change. This list is taken mostly from James DePlace's book on hockey firsts, and so I didn't do this research myself. Probably the most dominant change has been in equipment, both for the goaltenders and the equipment of the people who are shooting at them. So how did I compare? To compare performance over time, the same data must be available. Data consistent from 1904 to 2012 is games and minutes played, games won, lost, or tied, goals against, and shutouts. The most valid comparison is between those playing with similar equipment and under similar rules and conditions. To do so, the 108 years were divided into eras with reasonably consistent traits within those eras. Using 5 seasons as a minimum for a successful career, eras were chosen to be at least 5 and no more than 7 years. This resulted in 19 eras over the 108 years. You can see 10 of 5, 6 of 6, and 3 of 7 years. Various factors, both on and off the ice, affected the selection of eras. It wasn't just what happened on the ice, it was also things that happened off the ice. Only regular season data was used. So I know a lot of people who have done comparison of goaltenders have looked at who would be most likely to win the 7th game in the Stanley Cup Finals. This doesn't include that type of data. Most of the data came from the SIHR website. Most stable decade in the NHL was the 1980s. 5 seasons equaled 400 games. Since the careers of most players did not mirror my eras, 400 was divided by 2. So anyone playing 200 games would qualify in the 1980s eras. The minimum games required to qualify in any era was equal to 50% of the games in the 5 seasons with the fewest games in that era. Hope nobody brought a calculator with them. All goalies who played the minimum number of games were considered. They were compared on 4 factors: goals against average, wins, points, and shutouts. Each factor was weighted 80% for performance and 20% for longevity. And JP referred to my research, what I presented in Quebec City, and those relationships seemed to work for defensemen then, so I stuck with them for goaltenders. Each factor was calculated for all the goalies in the era, and the median value of each factor was selected for comparison. This gave a ratio of each goalie to the median. The 4 ratios for each goalie were totaled and then compared with the other eras. The results were slanted. Since I was comparing the median, the results were slanted to eras with high populations. So the more goalies you had in the era, the more likely you were to have a high ratio in that era. Since that tended to eliminate the eras when there were only 5 goalies, such as in the 50s and 60s, I wasn't too happy with the results, so I thought, well, I'll try instead of using the median, I'll relate everything to the 4th place player. And so the calculations were redone, and the results then became slanted the opposite way, that when you only had 5 players in the population, then that era became dominant. So I pulled a rabbit out of the hat and decided I would use the square root of the population as the basis for comparison. This resulted in more even representation in all sized eras. This is an example from the 1950s era. Shows how the wins factor was calculated. Only 5 goalies met the minimum of 137 games played. The square root of 5 is greater than 2, so the 3rd place was used for comparison. Harry Lumley had the best win ratio for that era. So you can see that he's at the top of the list, and these are the only other 5 goalies that played at least 137 games between 1946 and 1950. And I've got the formulas across the top there if anybody wants to think about it. We won't get into too much detail on that basis, certainly don't have time. So what I just showed you was just the wins column. This is the aggregate for 1950, so that you add up their ratio for wins, goals against, points, and shutouts. After adding all the ratios, Bill Durnan had the best aggregate for the era. Now the next 19 slides are going to show you the same data for each of the 19 eras. 1904 to 1910 was probably the hardest era to deal with, because the only consistency in that period was inconsistency. You had various leagues, various teams, players who had no loyalty to their team. They played one game somewhere else. So, in the end, it was Riley Hearn who played for Portage Lake Houghton in the International Hockey League for 3 years, and for the Montreal Wanderers for 3 years in 3 different leagues. He had the best aggregate. Jack Winchester was better in shutout. Quite often you'll see in the slide the bold letters indicate who the leader was in the different ratios, but really you probably should just concentrate on the column to the right. In the 1915 era, it was Frank Stonewall Morrison from the New Glasgow team in the Maritime Pro Leagues who had the best aggregate, although George's Vesna had a better GIA result and Paddy Moran had a better win ratio. In 1921, Clint Benedict of the Ottawa Senators ran the board, won in every category. 1926, another Ottawa Senator, Alex Connell, repeated what Clint Benedict had done 5 years earlier. 1932 was George Hainsworth of Montreal Canadiens, led the aggregate on the strength of GAA points. The Boston Bruins' Tiny Thompson swept all the ratios in 1939. In one of the rare instances, Davy Kerr finished second in every ratio as well. World War II left a void in nets on many teams. Only 5 goalies met the minimum game standard in 1945. Frank Brimsek of the Bruins led in 3 ratios, but Johnny Mowers had more shutouts. Again, only 5 goalies made the cutoff in 1950. So we saw the example given, Bill Gernon of the Montreal Canadiens had the best aggregate. The NHL had 6 teams, only 6 goalies qualified in 1956. Detroit Red Wing Terry Sawchuk led in all ratios. The Montreal Canadiens dominating the league. Jacques Plante had the best aggregate in 1962. Glenn Hall from the Chicago Blackhawks led in all but shutouts in 1967. Roger Grosser had more shutouts. With NHL expansion, 10 goalies qualified in 1972. Eddie Jackman from the New York Rangers had enough in goals against average and shutouts to lead the era. Further expansion and inclusion of the WHA resulted in 34 qualifying in 1979. Montreal Canadiens Ken Dryden led in 3 of the 4 ratios. With the WHA laid to rest, only 16 played the minimum number of games in 1984. Pete Peters swept the board, splitting the time between the Philadelphia Flyers and the Boston Bruins. Competition was fierce in 1989, with the best goals against average only 1% above the base value. It was Clint Malarchuk's shutout supremacy that garnered him the best aggregate while playing for the Quebec Nordiques and the Washington Capitals. Chicago Blackhawk Eddie Belfour had the edge over 19 others in 1994 on the strength of the shutouts. Martin Brodeur of the New Jersey Devils exceeded 24 others in 1999 with a strong GAA ratio. Brodeur won it again in all categories in 2004. And in 2012, he had closer competition from Henrik Lundqvist, but still led over 38 others. Looking primarily at longevity, only 2 qualified in 4 eras, with Clint Benedict winning easily over Hugh Lehman. 15 goalies qualified in 3 eras, with Martin Brodeur slightly ahead of Clint Benedict and Eddie Belfour. 66 goalies played in 2 eras, with Alex Connell winning over Sawchuk and Benedict. 202 goalies qualified in at least 1 era. The next 5 slides show the best era of the top 25. As you can see, some of them played in 4 eras, so I just took their best era when comparing the 202. Alex Connell led Terry Sawchuk for top spot. The 70s were well represented in 3rd, 4th, and 5th spots. As you can see, Bernie Perrant came in 5th place, but he never did win an era. The race was tight for the next 7 spots. 4.9, 4.85 was pretty close. All those goalies, but there was a wide range of eras in which they played. Jerry Cheevers was tied for 10th, but we'll see more from him later. Patrick Waugh, Davey Kerr, and Dominic Hasek did not win any eras, but they finished ahead of many who did. Finishing out the top 25 still showed close competition. The next 4 slides show the leaders of individual factors. For goals against average, Glenn Hall came out ahead of Sawchuk and Dryden, who tied for second, narrowly ahead of the next four. In shutouts, Alex Connell blew the opposition away with a shutout in every third game in the 1926 era. It was close, but Bernie Perron fell for it and Dryden. Jerry Cheevers had the best wins ratio with the Bruins in the 1972 era. Sawchuk and Jackman were close behind. Oops. Hit the wrong button here. No. Since wins constitute most of the points, it is not surprising that Cheevers led this category as well, but not by as much over Hearn, Sawchuk, and Jackman. So conclusions, well, I considered the project successful. It selected a lot of Hall of Fame members. The top 11 in the single era list are all Hockey Hall of Fame members. Those are 7 of the next 14. The top 25, only Jerry Cheevers was never selected as an All-Star. I felt that the process worked reasonably well, although some Hall of Famers did not fare well. A lot of goalies' success depends on the quality of the rest of the team and their interest in playing defense. So out of the 202, you can see that we had some who finished well down the list, although they're in the Hall of Fame, which indicates that they generally were good goalies, but they probably played on relatively poor teams. Certainly know that Roy Borders didn't have a lot of assistance for him with the New York Americans, and Jan Borges didn't have a great time with the Rangers at times. So, thank you, and any questions or comments?